In this video, we're going to start looking at the snapshots for the development of our ASP.NET 2.0 quiz engine. Now, just to recap the previous video, a snapshot is the present state of the application at a given moment in time. So for each hour or two of development, I'm going to stop working, I'll save off the current state of the code, and then I'll explain what I just accomplished. So in this video, we're going to look at the first three snapshots. The first snapshot took me about 2 hours, and what did I accomplish during that 2-hour time frame? Well, as you can see here, I've added a number of pages to my project. We have the default page, the questions page, recover password, results, and start. So I'll look at each of these: the recover password page, the start page, the questions page, where we'll have each of the individual questions pop up and allow the user to select an answer, and then finally the results page. And as you can see, they each have kind of a similar look and feel. I basically created one as a template, used a table for layout purposes, and then copied that table from page to page, changing the graphics and some of the text in each of the pages. The graphics I used from what my friend provided for me, the graphic artist, for some of the titles, like the results, the starting quiz now graphic, the question graphic, and so on. And so I merely just would drag and drop from the images folder each individual item into place on my little table template. I also went through the exercise of applying the cascading style sheet that my friend the graphic artist created for me, as we saw in the previous video, and applied that to every control and the text. And we'll see this primarily within the default.aspx page, where the text that I typed in, for example, this little login passage here, as well as all the text and all of the given properties that modify the various aspects of each of the controls, those had to be modified to the cascading style sheet tags that were created for me. And that takes a considerable amount of time to locate all those properties and to change them appropriately. But I spent the majority of the time on the default.aspx page, and what I decided to do here was combine several of the operational elements of the site onto this single page, and I did that through the use of the login view. So as we saw mocked up, there were different pages for login, for register a new user, and then ultimately the default page where the user could see their test history and the available tests that they can take. What I did was combine those all together into a single login view. So what you're looking at right now is the view of the page as a user comes in and is not authenticated. They have not logged in yet. Once they've successfully logged into the website, however, what we want to do is then display the logged in template, which will show the available tests, the test result history, allow them to perform some basic account maintenance like change their password and so on. So let's take a look at what this accomplished. We'll go ahead and hit the Run button, the Start Debugging button on our toolbar, and we can see our application pop open. We're going to log in using admin and then uppercase P, lowercase ass, at symbol, lowercase word, and then the number 1. So uppercase P, lowercase ass, the at symbol, lowercase word, 1. So pass at word 1, and we'll click the login button, and then our login view will display the available test, the test result history, and so on. You can see here we have our little control that allows us to see the current user, and we've been able to change that text based on whether or not they are authenticated and so on. And we did that through the use of this login name control, and then we also have a login status control that allows them to either log in or log out based on whether they're authenticated or not currently on the site. So basically what we did was just tackle a lot of the easy stuff first and sort of ease into the development process. So I've essentially created the skeleton of the application, and now I want to dive into some specific parts of the application and more fully flesh them out. And so The next thing that I really felt like I needed to do was address the database, and we're going to look at that in the next snapshot. So we're currently taking a look at snapshot number 2, and the only thing that I really did within the last half hour to 45 minutes of this snapshot was to create our quiz.mdf database. And in that database, I added 3 tables: the quiz table, the question table, and the user quiz. We'll take a look at each of these tables in just a moment, but let's just talk at a high level about the relationship between the quiz.mdf and the ASP.NET DB.mdf. Do you recall what this file was for from our previous discussions? Well, it's the database that will contain the values for the membership and roles functionality within ASP.NET 2.0. Whenever we go to the ASP.NET configuration tool, the website administration tool, and we click security and go to manage our users, and you'll note that I already added a user called admin here, that data and the roles that user is associated with are stored in that ASP.NET DB.mdf file. Now we're going to want to associate certain elements of our quiz back to the users within our table, or within our ASP.NET DB.mdf file. Particularly, each user will have the historical results of the quizzes they've taken stored within our quiz database. Now, could I have just taken these 3 tables, this question, quiz, and user quiz tables, and added them to the ASP.NET DB.mdf file? I think I could have done that. Now, just for separation purposes and because I don't feel comfortable with modifying that file just yet, I decided as a design decision to keep them in their own MDF file. Now, there's ramifications for that decision, and I'll point those out in just a moment. But I didn't feel comfortable with changing or adulterating this automatically generated ASP.NET DB.mdf file because, again, I'm working with a beta version of the software, and as we all know, things can change out from under us. Additionally, I didn't want to lock myself into any specific implementation in case in future versions of the software the database schema changes. So that's just a design decision I made. It was a difficult choice to make. However, it's one that I've made and now I'll have to live with. And there are some ramifications I noted just a moment ago, not the least of which is when I try to associate back all the values, the historical values for a given quiz for a given user. But let's first of all take a look at the quiz table. Very simple, straightforward, simply a primary key called quiz ID and the title of the quiz. Now we may want to come back to this a little later in a future snapshot and change or add some values here so that we can give some more descriptive text about a given quiz. This will work for now. Each quiz has a number of questions that are associated with it. Here's where another difficult design decision came in. You'll note here that we see some typical stuff. The question ID, the primary key. At the very bottom we have the quiz ID, which is the foreign key back to the quiz table. So quizzes will have one or more questions associated with them. You'll see that there's the title, which will be the actual question, and then there's a series of answers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this is where the difficult decision came in. The database designer within me felt that it would be appropriate to put the answers in their own table. The software developer inside of me decided that it would be easier if I just denormalized them back into a much more flat structure for my table and put each of the answers in their own given columns. It would make it very easy when I go to pull those answers out of the database to then display on my question.aspx page. Now, as a result of that design decision, I've basically locked myself into a certain specific implementation. In other words, it can only be multiple choice, and there have to be essentially 4 questions. There can't be 5. There can't be 3, or rather answers. There can only be 4 answers: A, B, C, and D. And so for my purposes in this little application, that works just fine. However, it's less than robust, less than feature-filled when compared with some of the commercial versions of quiz engines that are available on the market today. But it's a decision that I'm going to have to live with for this time. So at any rate, we have the available answers, and there's an old saying that goes something like this: normalize until it hurts. denormalize until it works. So I've decided to take the latter route and denormalize those into a single table. Okay, so we have then the correct answer, which will be either 1, 2, 3, or 4. The answer explanation, which can be any long string that explains why a given answer is correct or incorrect. The ordinal value, the question order, so a given quiz has a number of questions. This will keep track of the order that those questions should appear to the user. And then, as we've already looked at, the quiz ID, the foreign key field back to the quiz table. Now, let's take a look at the user quiz table. This will again store the historical results of a given user taking a given test. So many of these fields are basically for associative purposes. The user quiz ID is our primary key. We have two foreign keys, the quiz ID, which associates back to a given quiz, and then the username, which associates with the ASP.NET db.mdf. And if we were to drill down and take a look at the given tables, there is a table called ASP.NET Users, and within that there is a field called Username. So this will be essentially a non-relational database enforced constraint. So we'll have to enforce this constraint within our own code because SQL Server doesn't necessarily, Express Edition doesn't allow constraints across multiple databases, and if it does, then it's a fairly complex procedure. So we'll merely just do this in code, which comes with its own particular challenges. We won't really pay attention to those at this point. But that's essentially how we're going to associate a historical quiz with how many correct answers there were from that quiz session and the date and the time that the quiz was completed. Okay, so that finishes up the second snapshot. Now we're going to move on to the third snapshot and try to take a first crack at some of this functionality. Okay, so here we are in the third snapshot, and this took about another hour and a half, hour 45 minutes or so. And my focus on this snapshot was to get the process of displaying and retrieving the questions and the answers, respectively, from the user. And so much of the work that I did in that test quiz project that we reviewed in the previous video really came into play here. If you recall from that discussion, we had to make a decision about how we were going to store the information from question to question. Now, there's a number of different ways we could have gone about it. Could have stored the values as the user goes from question 1 to question 2 to question 3 for a given quiz. Could have persisted those within a database. Could have persisted them in XML. Or there's a number of ways we could have persisted them in memory, such as the view state object, but we chose to use the session object because we've been assured by the ASP.NET 2.0 team that this is something that we can rely on and will not be a heavy burden from a server perspective. So we're going to go ahead and use that. And also we know that for our purposes, this is not going to be a very high-trafficked website. And quite honestly, a more complex implementation would have taken a lot of time, a luxury that we simply don't have at this point. So there are 3 pages that are involved in this process: the start page, the questions page, and the results page. The user will start on the start page, and they'll click the start button to get started. Let's go ahead and take a look at the code behind and see what happens magically on this page. First of all, you'll notice that we needed some mechanism to hold on to the answers, each answer that the user gave. So, and we know that we're going to store it in session, but basically what I did, I came up with this solution where I wanted to use a domain-specific object, a class called called answer, to save the values of each individual answer that will then collect up and review on the final page, the results page. So let's just start here. The answer class has a question ID, the correct answer, and then the user's answer, and then a read-only property called result, which will display either correct or incorrect depending on whether the user's answer was equal to the correct answer. So we'll basically be using this object, this answer object, as it's created after each question is answered by the user and added into a collection. And we're going to use an array list to store all these individual answer objects. And at the very end of the process of going through and answering each of the individual questions, we'll essentially iterate through each of these individual answer objects in our array list and then display them to the user and store them into the database. Okay, so we're going to use this answer object beginning in the questions.aspx page, but let's continue here. What we need to do first is to basically set some memory aside for a new instance of our array list, which we're calling answer list. And then we've also created another session variable called the quiz ID. And this will be very important, as I'll demonstrate here on the questions page. Okay, so again, from our discussion in the test quiz project, which was sort of our scratch pad for coming up with some ideas about how we'll display and allow the user to interact with each of the individual questions in our quizzes, that we're going to take a slightly different approach than what might be out there normally, just for brevity's sake. And essentially we're going to use a detail view to display the question and the 4 answers, and these will be displayed from our SQL data source. And we'll look at that data source in just a moment. And then the user will be able to select their answer from this combo box, this drop-down list. If we were to select the little tasks arrow and select edit items, you can see that we hard-coded answer 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the values are respectively 1, 2, 3, and 4. And those will be evaluated against the correct answer at the end of the process. Let's go ahead and cancel that for now. And so let's take a look then at the question.aspx.vb and look at the page load. You see we have question details.databind is all that happens there. So the question comes in, how does it know which set of questions to display? We haven't told it what quiz that the user is currently taking. And also we need to tell it at some point as well what the next question is that should be displayed to the end user. So both of these questions can be really resolved in how we implemented the SQL data source. Let's go ahead and click the Configure Data Source, select the Next button, and we'll click Next again. And here you can see that we've defined a custom select statement. Select question ID, title, answer 1, answer 2, answer 3, answer 4, correct answer, question order from the question table, where the quiz ID equals this parameter at quiz, and then order by question order. So how do we send in this parameter, this quiz ID? Well, this is where the configure data source wizard actually gets really cool, and that is through the use of our session quiz ID. Now you recall in the start.aspx.vb page that we created a new session variable called quiz ID, and we hard-coded it at this point to the value of 1. We'll change that up in the future, but we'll pull from that value here in order to populate this parameter. So that's one of the neat things that doesn't require a lot of code that we write. We're able to wire that up fairly quickly and easily just by referencing a given field of our session object. Now we could have grabbed that value from a cookie, from a control, from a form, from the profile object, from a query string. However, we chose to go the route of the session, and so we had to choose the appropriate field. I'm going to go ahead and click cancel here because I don't want to make any changes to that. So as this page loads, the SQL data source will look for the quiz ID parameter, find it in the session, retrieve all of the questions for this given quiz, and then display the first one in our little details view grid. When the user clicks the next button, let's go ahead and take a look at the code behind for the button 1 click event. Essentially what we need to do is create a new instance of our answer object and add that to our answer list array list. So here what we're doing is creating a new answer object. Remember our answer object that we looked at a little bit ago? Just has 4 simple properties. Question ID, correct answer, user answer, and then a read-only result answer. Okay, so let's go ahead back here. We're going to create a new instance of this, record the question ID, which we're going to pull from the question order, from the current row of data in our question details.data item. So the current data item in our detail view control. We're going to grab the correct answer as well from that data row view, and then grab whatever the user selected in the answer drop-down list. Then what we're going to do is retrieve our answer list and add our new answer to it, and then save it back into session. So we're going to grab it down, plop in a new answer, and then save it back into memory. Finally, we need to tell the next page what it should be displaying. So again, we want to set the page index for our question detail object, that little grid for that will display the details. So based on the current page index and the number of pages that are in our, or rather retrieved by our data source, then we'll either increment the page index, or we'll just do a response redirect to the results.aspx page. Okay, so now let's go take a look at the results.aspx page. It's fairly straightforward. The first thing that we see here is we've got a grid that will display each of the individual question numbers, what the correct answer was, what the user's answer was, and then whether it was correct or incorrect. When the user selects an individual row to review that answer, it will display the question number, the question, the 4 possible answers, the correct answer, and then the explanation, all pulled from the database. Now this data will be pulled directly from our answer list, that array list that we've been holding on to in our session object. When the user selects one of the rows, we'll combine it with the list of questions from our question database. So we'll filter what's displayed here by the selection here. Now how do we accomplish that? Well, let's take a look first of all what we did and select edit columns. You can see that we just created 4 bound fields: question, correct answer, your answer, and result, making sure that the data field is set correctly to whatever we called it in our answer object. So these are all properties of our answer object, user answer. So these will be bound to automatically by ASP.NET 2.0. Pretty cool. Let's cancel that. So where does this select column come from? Well, we're going to have to look at the properties. So let's hit F4. Let's close this first. Let's hit F4 on our keyboard. That'll bring up our properties window. And if you take a look at this auto-generate select button, set equal to true, that's what adds this select column here. But we have to do one other thing, and that is to change the, let's see if we can find it. Oh, here we go. Data key names field. It has to be set to essentially what is the equivalent of the primary key. In this case, it's going to be the question ID, the unique identifier that separates one question from the next question. So in that case, within our answer object, that's the question ID field. So that when we select one, it'll have a unique result that'll be displayed below. Okay, so now let's take a look at this SQL data source. There's really nothing special that goes on here at all. We're just retrieving all of the columns except for the quiz ID, which I think is a mistake we'll have to come back and fix, from the question table. Cancel that. And we'll note here that our details view is then bound to this data source. But we don't want to display just any row from our data source. We only want to display the row that was selected here in the select button column on our data grid. How is that accomplished? Let's take a look at the results view and look at the result grid underscore selected index changed event. You'll see that we apply a filter expression to the SQL data source where we set that key field, that question ID, equal to whatever the selected value was of that grid. So again, we're pulling whether it was 1, 2, 3, or 4, and we're going to send that to this filter expression, which will only display the corresponding question with all of its answers, correct answer, explanation, all that information here in this grid. So let's take a look and see how this works. Okay, so here we go. We're going to run our application. And get the start page. We'll click the start button. And so we've got a bunch of silly questions that I just entered for the purpose of testing this from a famous Monty Python skit. So we'll just start selecting some answers to some questions here. Click the finish button, and we can see now how many answers are correct and incorrect, what the correct answer was versus what our answer was. And then by selecting one of the items here, we can review it here in the bottom, along with what the correct answer was and the explanation for that given item. Okay, so everything is coming along very nicely. We've made a lot of progress here in just a couple of hours. There's some refinements that need to be addressed, and so we'll do that in the next video or two as we continue on looking at further snapshots. What do we have left to do? Actually, we've got quite a bit to do. First of all, we haven't really recorded any of the results into the database, and we're going to need to do that here on that results.aspx page. Then we haven't displayed in the default.aspx page, we haven't displayed any of the, as we take a look here, let's go to the logged in template. This still needs to be fleshed out. The available tests, the test result history, and so on. So we've got still quite a bit to do, and we wanted to add some other features as well. But we're off to a great start, and so we're going to conclude this video for now. Thank you.